My husband provided for his family his whole life. After he died, his parents insisted I continue paying them. Can you imagine losing the love of your life, your entire world, your future in an instant, and then just weeks later, having the very people you thought would be your support system, his family, turn on you not with comfort, but with endless demands, accusations, and outright harassment? Because that's exactly what happened to me, and it forced me to make a choice that changed absolutely everything. My husband, Felix, he died 8 months ago. A heart attack. 36 years old. No warning. No symptoms. He just collapsed at work one afternoon and never came home. I found out when his boss called me, because Felix wasn't answering his phone. I thought it was a joke at first. Felix was healthy. Felix was young. Felix was supposed to grow old with me. We'd been married for 7 years, happy years. No kids yet. We were waiting until we were more stable. He had a good job, project manager at a construction company. I worked part-time as a bookkeeper, finishing my accounting degree online. We were comfortable, but definitely not wealthy. The thing is, the money we did have never stayed in our accounts for long. Because for as long as I knew him, Felix had been supporting his entire family. His parents, his 2 younger siblings, since he was 22. His father, he hadn't worked in 15 years, always claiming a bad back, though he seemed perfectly fine golfing twice a week and fishing every weekend. His mother worked part-time at a salon, but she spent more than she earned on things she absolutely didn't need. Damon, his younger brother, was 24 and had been in college for 6 years, just changing majors every semester, failing classes, retaking courses, all on Felix's dime. And Zoe, his younger sister, 20, just started university, also funded entirely by Felix. Every single month, Felix sent his parents $2,000. He paid Damon's tuition and rent, covered Zoe's expenses, picked up the tab whenever the family went out to eat, bought his mother birthday gifts that she still complained weren't expensive enough, fixed his father's car, paid for their home repairs, covered their medical bills. In the 7 years we were married, Felix sent his family over $200,000. Think about that. $200,000. That could have been our house down payment, our retirement fund, our future children's college savings. I never complained. Not really. Because Felix, he felt responsible for them. He was the oldest son, the successful one, the one who'd made it out, and I think felt guilty about leaving them behind. He genuinely believed that once his siblings graduated and got jobs, the financial burden would ease. He never got to see if that was true. The funeral was a blur. His parents sat in the front row and cried so loudly, so performatively, that people 3 rows back couldn't even hear the eulogy. His mother clutched my arm, called me her daughter, said we'd get through this together as a family. I believed her. I was drowning in grief, desperate for support, for anyone who had loved Felix as much as I did. Then the call started. The first one came 2 weeks after the funeral. It was Felix's father. He asked, "When will you be sending this month's payment?" I honestly thought I'd misheard him. I asked what he meant. "Felix always sent money on the 15th, he said, and it's the 18th. We have bills to pay." I tried to explain. I was still sorting out Felix's affairs. I'd barely been able to get out of bed. I hadn't even gone back to work yet. I was completely broken. He said he understood, but they still needed the money. I sent it. I was too numb to fight. The next month they called again. This time his mother. "I know this is hard for you, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "but the family is depending on that income. Felix would have wanted you to take care of us. You're part of the family now, and the family has obligations." I sent the money, and again the month after that. For 4 grueling months, I drained my savings. I kept paying people who had never once asked how I was doing, who had never offered to help me with anything, who had never acknowledged that I'd lost my husband. Well, they'd simply lost their cash flow, and then I ran out of money. Felix's life insurance had mostly gone to paying off our debts and covering the funeral costs. My part-time income simply couldn't support myself and my entire extended family. I called his mother, tried to explain that I couldn't send money anymore, that I was barely making ends meet. I needed to finish my degree, get a better job, just to support myself. She lost her mind. She called me selfish for keeping Felix's money to myself. Said I owed them for raising the man I'd married. Said Felix would be ashamed of how I was treating his family. I reminded her that I'd sent them $8,000 in the 4 months since Felix died. Money I couldn't afford. Money that had emptied my savings. Money I'd never see again, while I struggled to pay my own rent. She just scoffed. That's not enough, she snapped. Damon still has 2 more years of school. Zoe needs her expenses covered. We've been counting on Felix's support, and you have a responsibility to continue it. I asked her, why can't Damon, who's 24, get a job? He needs to focus on his studies, she shrieked. Why can't Zoe, who's 20, take out loans like every other college student? That's not how our family does things, she retorted. And then the final straw. Why can't Felix's father, who is 58 and apparently healthy enough for golf and fishing, go back to work? She hung up on me. The calls didn't stop. They just got nastier. His father left voicemails, slurring, saying I was stealing from them. His mother started telling relatives I'd abandoned the family the moment Felix was gone. Damon sent texts, venomous words, accusing me of ruining his future by cutting off his tuition. And Zoe, whom I'd always thought was the sweet one, called me a greedy witch who never deserved her brother. Then they started showing up at my apartment, unannounced, uninvited, demanding to talk. I would hide behind my locked door, listening to Felix's father pound his fist against the wood. His mother screamed my name, over and over, getting louder each time. They'd been out there for 10 minutes already when my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Novak, my landlord, calling from downstairs. I answered, keeping my voice low. He asked if I needed him to call the police. Yes, I whispered. This is the 3rd time this week they've shown up without warning. I can't live like this anymore. He said he'd make the call right now, told me to stay inside. I thanked him, hung up. Felix's mother started kicking the door. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough that the thuds echoed through my apartment. She yelled that I was a coward for hiding from family, that Felix would be disgusted by how I was acting, that they just wanted to talk. I sat on my couch, staring at my shaking hands. My stomach churned. These were people I'd spent 7 years having dinners with, celebrating holidays with, treating like my own family. Now they terrified me. The police arrived 15 minutes later. I heard Mr. Novak's voice, then a deeper male voice telling Felix's parents to step back from the door. I waited another minute, heart pounding, before I slowly opened it. A police officer stood in the hallway, notepad out. Mr. Novak was there, looking concerned. Felix's parents were near the elevator, his mother crying dramatically, his father with his arms crossed, glaring. The officer asked if I was okay. I nodded. I'm fine now. He asked what was happening. I explained. These were my late husband's parents. They'd been showing up at my apartment, demanding money. I'd asked them to stop. They wouldn't listen. The officer wrote everything down. Then he turned to Felix's parents. His mother sobbed. We're just trying to check on family. She cut us off completely after our son died, and we're worried about her. His father chimed in. We have every right to visit our daughter-in-law. The officer asked me to show him my phone. I pulled up the call log. 12 missed calls from Felix's mother just today. 43 texts from various family members over the past week. Voicemails I hadn't listened to because I knew what they'd say. The officer looked at the screen for a long moment. Then, his voice stern, he told Felix's parents this was harassment, that I had the right to refuse contact, and if they showed up again, they could be arrested for trespassing. Felix's mother started crying harder. His father argued, This is ridiculous. We're family. The officer didn't budge. Doesn't matter. The law is clear. You need to leave now and not come back. He watched them get on the elevator before turning back to me. Do you want to file a formal report? He asked. Not yet, I said, but I might need to soon. He gave me his card. Call if they show up again. Mr. Novak walked the officer downstairs. I went back into my apartment, locked the door, and sank onto my couch. I waited until after 9 to call Paloma, my best friend. My hands were still shaking when I dialed. She answered on the second ring and knew immediately something was wrong. I started crying before I could even explain. She asked where I was. Home, I managed. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. Paloma showed up in 18 minutes with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. She hugged me at the door, held me until I stopped shaking. We sat on the couch. She opened the food while I poured wine into coffee mugs because I didn't have any clean, proper glasses. What happened? She asked gently. I told her everything. About Felix's parents showing up again. Mr. Novak calling the police. The officer's warning. How incredibly scared I was of people who used to feel like family. Paloma listened without interrupting. When I finished, I admitted something I'd been too ashamed to say out loud. I feel guilty, Paloma, I confessed, my voice barely a whisper, for cutting them off. Maybe I'm being selfish. Felix would have wanted me to help them. What if I'm doing the wrong thing? Paloma put down her wine. Her eyes, usually so warm, were firm. You need to stop thinking like that right now, Wendy, she said. She reminded me of the $8,000 I'd given them. Money I didn't have, money that had emptied my savings while I struggled to pay my own rent. Did they ever once call to ask how you were doing? She challenged. Did they offer to help with anything? Did they acknowledge that you lost your husband while they lost their income source? I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. That's because they don't care about you, Wendy. They care about money. She laid it all out for me. Felix's father, healthy enough to golf, claimed he couldn't work. His mother spent more than she earned. Damon, 24, 6 years in college, changing majors, failing classes, all on Felix's money. Zoe, 20, perfectly capable of getting student loans like millions of other students. These are adults, Wendy, Paloma said, her voice sharp with anger. Adults who chose not to support themselves because Felix made it easy for them. And now they expect you to do the same. I started crying again, but this time it was different. Hearing it laid out so plainly, so starkly made it real. Made it clear that I wasn't abandoning family. I was protecting myself from people who saw me as an ATM. The next morning, I forced myself to go to work. I hadn't slept much. My eyes were puffy, my head ached. I made it to the bookkeeping office by 8, tried to focus on the spreadsheets. Numbers usually calmed me, made sense when nothing else did. But I kept losing track of what I was entering. Tina, my supervisor, stopped by my desk around 10. Wendy, she said, do you have a minute to talk in my office? My stomach dropped. I was sure I was about to get in trouble for my terrible work. She closed the door, told me to sit. Then, her voice softer, you look awful. What's going on? I hadn't planned to tell her. Tina was my boss, not my friend. But something in her genuine concern made me break down. I told her everything. About Felix, about his family, the demands, the harassment, the police last night. How I was barely holding it together. Tina listened, without checking her watch, without any sign of impatience. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. My husband died 6 years ago, she said quietly. Heart problems they caught too late. She explained that his mother had tried the exact same thing Felix's family was doing. Demanding money, claiming Tina owed her, because that's what family did. Tina had almost given in, consumed by guilt. But a friend gave her the name of a family law attorney. He helped her understand she had no legal obligation to support her mother-in-law. The attorney sent a letter, set clear boundaries, and the harassment stopped. She opened her desk drawer, pulled out a business card. Darren Mills, she said, family law attorney. He's tough but fair. He helped me get my life back after my husband died. I took the card, thanked her numbly. Take the rest of the day off if you need to, she offered. But I told her I'd rather work. Sitting at home alone sounded worse than staring at spreadsheets. I called Darren Mills during my lunch break. The secretary said he had an opening at 3 today. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. His office was downtown, in a building that looked more expensive than I felt comfortable with. Mirrors and polished metal in the elevator. I found his suite, checked in, filled out intake forms, trying not to feel embarrassed about needing a lawyer to deal with my dead husband's family. Darren called me back at 3 exactly. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, glasses, a friendly handshake. Tell me what's happening, he said. I poured it all out. Felix supporting his family for years, the $200,000, their demands after he died, the harassment, the threats, them showing up at my apartment. Darren took notes silently. When I finished, he asked specific questions. Did Felix sign any legal agreements promising continued support? No. Did you sign anything? No. Any documentation of loans that needed to be repaid? No. Just voluntary transfers Felix made every month. Darren put down his pen, looked at me directly. You have zero legal obligation to support Felix's adult family members, Wendy. The money Felix sent was voluntary gifts. You can stop anytime you want. The fact that they are harassing you after you stopped is actually illegal. He said if they continued, we could pursue restraining orders. I felt something loosen in my chest, a physical release of tension. Hearing a lawyer, an authority, Say I didn't owe them anything made it undeniably real. Darren said the first step was a formal cease and desist letter. It would explain I had no legal obligation. Demand they stop all contact. If they violated it, we'd have documentation for restraining orders. He could have the letter ready by tomorrow. My phone rang while I was still sitting in Darren's office. Felix's mother. I looked at Darren, he nodded. I answered, put it on speaker. She started screaming immediately. Called me a thief. Said I was stealing from the family, that Felix would be ashamed, that I was abandoning them. We've been counting on that money, she shrieked. You have no right to cut us off. You owe us for raising the man you married. If you don't send payments again, we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I didn't say anything, just let her scream. Darren wrote everything down. When she finally stopped for breath, I said, "Don't contact me again," and hung up. Darren looked satisfied. That call was perfect documentation of harassment, he stated. Threats, demands for money, even after you said no. He advised me to stop answering their calls entirely from now on. Let everything go to voicemail so he could document it. He'd send the cease and desist letter tomorrow via certified mail. After that, any contact from them would be a clear violation. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. Someone with legal authority had confirmed what I'd been afraid to believe. I didn't owe Felix's family anything. Their harassment was wrong, and I had options to make it stop. 2 days later, Damon showed up at my workplace. I was heading to my car for lunch when I saw him, leaning against the driver's door. My stomach dropped. He straightened when he spotted me, held up his hands like he was being friendly. "Just want to talk," he said, but his tone was anything but friendly. I stopped about 10 feet away. "I have nothing to say to you." When I tried to walk past, he moved to block my car door completely. "We need to have this conversation, whether you want to or not." I pulled out my phone, dialed Paloma's number. She answered on the second ring, and I put her on speaker without saying hello. Damon's expression shifted when he heard me tell Paloma I was in the parking lot with him blocking my car. He started talking immediately, probably realizing he had a witness now. "Why are you destroying my education? Ruining my entire future?" "Felix promised to support me," he whined. I looked at him, standing there in expensive sneakers and a designer jacket Felix probably bought. "You are 24 years old," I said, my voice steady, "and you've been in college for 6 years while my husband paid for everything. Most students work jobs and take out loans. Why do you think you're special enough to have someone else fund your endless degree changes while you fail classes and retake courses?" His face went red. He called me selfish, said Felix always took care of family, and I was disrespecting Felix's memory by abandoning them. He claimed I owed them because they raised the man I married, and that debt didn't end just because Felix died. Through the speaker, I heard Paloma's voice. "I'm recording this, Damon. You need to leave immediately, or I'm calling the police." He backed away from my car, finally, but he was shouting now. "My family won't forget how you abandoned us. You'll regret this." I got in my car, locked the doors, shaking, while he was still yelling in the parking lot. I didn't go to lunch. I sat there until Paloma showed up 20 minutes later. That evening, I drove to an office across town to meet Sean McGowan. Tina had given me his number, saying Sean specialized in grief therapy. His office was small, comfortable, soft lighting, chairs that didn't feel like a doctor's office. Sean was maybe 50 with gray hair and a calm voice that made me feel less crazy for being there. I sat down and everything came out in a rush. Felix dying, his family demanding money, my inability to pay, my guilt. I explained I was dealing with raw grief, but also white-hot anger at his family's treatment of me. I didn't know how to separate the two. Sean listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "What do you think Felix would want for you right now?" I immediately said, "Felix would want me to take care of his family." Sean paused. "Would Felix want you to empty your savings and struggle to pay rent while grieving his death?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. Sean helped me understand that I could love Felix's memory while recognizing that his family had taken advantage of his guilt and sense of obligation. He pointed out that healthy families don't demand financial support from a grieving widow. Families who truly cared would be asking how I was doing, not when the next check was coming. Something shifted in my chest during that session. I started talking about all the things Felix and I had planned. The house we wanted, the kids, the retirement we were saving for. Except we weren't saving for any of it because all our money went to his family. We postponed children because we wanted to be financially stable. But we were never going to be stable as long as Felix sent $2,000 every month. We should have been building our future. Instead, we funded his parents' lifestyle and his siblings' refusal to take adult responsibility. Felix and I said out loud in Sean's office and started crying. We never got the chance to build our own life. All those years of marriage, and we never got to actually live for ourselves. I drove home from Sean's office feeling drained, but somehow lighter. My phone buzzed while I was pulling into my parking spot. A text from an unknown number. A certified letter had been delivered to an address I recognized as Felix's parents' house. Darren's cease and desist letter. I sat in my car waiting. It didn't take long. Within the hour, my phone started buzzing. Text after text. Miranda, Nathaniel, Damon, Zoe. I didn't read them at first. Just watched the notifications pile up. Finally, I opened them. Miranda called me a heartless witch. Nathaniel said I was a thief, and they were going to sue me for every penny Felix would have sent them. Damon wrote that I was destroying his life. Zoe sent a long message about how I never deserved her brother. The messages kept coming. Threats to sue. Threats to tell everyone what kind of person I really was. Threats to make sure I never had peace. I screenshotted every single message and forwarded them to Darren. He called me back within 20 minutes. This is perfect for our case, he said, grimly pleased. If we need restraining orders, these messages show a clear pattern of harassment and intimidation after being legally told to stop contact. He told me to keep documenting everything. And don't respond. Let them keep digging their own hole. I sat on my couch that night, looking at my phone full of hateful messages from people who were supposed to be my family. People I'd supported financially for years. People who'd never once asked if I was okay after Felix died. They were threatening to sue me for money I never legally owed them, while I was still struggling to afford groceries. I thought about Felix. Had he ever seen this side of his family? Or was he just too consumed by guilt over his own success to notice how they used him? A week passed without a single contact from Felix's family. The silence felt wrong somehow, like the pause before a storm gets worse. I was at work when my phone rang from an unrecognized number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered. Zoe's voice came through, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She was begging me to reconsider, saying she'd have to drop out of school. Do I mean anything to you? After being your sister-in-law for 7 years. The tears sounded real enough that my chest tightened with guilt. I remembered all those family dinners where Zoe had seemed like the only normal one, the one who actually asked about my day. But then I remembered the voicemail she'd left calling me a greedy witch. My sympathy cooled instantly. Zoe, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands, I do care about you. I always have. But you're 20 years old, and you're perfectly capable of getting student loans and a part-time job, like millions of other college students. I'm barely surviving financially myself right now. I can't fund your education when I'm still paying for my own degree and struggling to cover basic expenses. I just lost my husband, and I emptied my savings trying to help your family. I have nothing left to give. The crying stopped instantly. The change was so sudden it made me flinch. Her voice went completely cold and flat. You're going to regret this decision, she said, devoid of emotion. The whole family knows what a selfish person you really are, and they're going to make sure everyone else knows it, too. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, trying to process how fast she'd switched from sobbing victim to threatening enemy. It had taken maybe 3 seconds. I called Paloma that night. She said Zoe's performance sounded like something out of a bad movie, and the family was clearly coordinating their attacks. Screenshot everything, Wendy. Keep records of every single contact. I promised I would, though part of me still felt guilty for cutting off a 20-year-old kid. Paloma reminded me that 20-year-old kids manage to pay for college every day without someone else's widow funding it. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. My stomach dropped before I even looked at them. Most were from relatives I barely knew, Felix's cousins, aunts, family friends. Is it true you stole Felix's life insurance money? Some asked. Others were more aggressive, calling me disgusting. I had no idea what they were talking about until Paloma called me. She'd already seen it. Miranda, Felix's mother, had posted on social media. She claimed I'd stolen Felix's life insurance money meant for his family. She was telling everyone that I was keeping money that rightfully belonged to them, that Felix had wanted his family taken care of, and I was preventing that out of pure selfishness. The post had dozens of comments from people I'd never met, all agreeing I was horrible, a thief. Some suggested I be sued or reported to the police. Paloma had already screenshotted everything. She was absolutely furious, wanted to post the truth immediately, tell everyone what Felix's family was really like. But when she called Darren, he told her not to engage on social media at all. That's what they want, he said, to drag her into a public fight where they can play the victims. He told her to send him all the screenshots and let him handle it legally. I spent the rest of that day getting messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, all asking about the life insurance. Some were genuinely concerned. Others had already decided I was guilty. I didn't respond to any of them because Darren had told me not to. But it took everything I had to stay quiet while people who knew nothing about my situation called me a thief. Darren moved fast. Within 2 days, he drafted a letter to Miranda, demanding she remove the posts immediately and stop making false statements. The letter included copies of Felix's life insurance policy, showing I was the sole beneficiary, along with documentation of how the money had been used for legitimate expenses, paying off our debts, covering funeral costs. He sent copies by certified mail and email, creating a clear paper trail. I had my regular appointment with Sean that week, and I completely broke down. I couldn't understand how Felix's death had somehow turned me into the villain in his family story. I had loved him. I had supported his choice to help his family, even when it hurt us financially. And now I was being attacked for not continuing to bankrupt myself for people who'd never cared about me. Sean let me cry for a while. Then he explained that Felix's family needed a villain right now, because the alternative was confronting their own financial irresponsibility and entitlement. It was easier for them to blame me than to admit they'd been using Felix for years, never developing any independence. He said they probably genuinely believed their own story at this point. They'd convinced themselves they were entitled to that money, and I was stealing from them. It doesn't make it right, he said, but it explains why they're so aggressive about it. When I got home that evening, Mr. Novak, my landlord, stopped me in the lobby. He looked uncomfortable. Felix's father, he said, came by earlier today, asking which apartment was yours. Mr. Novak hadn't told him anything, but he wanted me to know. Situation seems to be getting worse, he said. He asked if I was okay. I thanked him, told him I had a lawyer, but appreciated the warning. I called Darren immediately. I told him about Nathaniel coming to the building, Mr. Novak's concern, the escalating harassment. Darren listened. Then he said, "We have more than enough documented evidence to file for restraining orders. The harassment, the threats, the unwanted contact, in person, online, at my home, my workplace, all of it added up to a clear pattern a judge would take seriously. He'd start the paperwork for protection orders against all 4 of them, Miranda, Nathaniel, Damon, and Zoe. The hearing would be in about 3 weeks. In the meantime, he told me to document every single contact attempt, no matter how small. He also advised me to avoid being alone in isolated places and to consider staying with friends if I felt unsafe. I told him I'd think about it, though the idea of being driven out of my own home made me angry enough to refuse out of spite. But that night, I packed a bag and drove to Paloma's house. She answered the door in pajamas, pulled me into a hug without asking any questions. Her husband, Miguel, took my bag upstairs to their guest room. Paloma made tea. I sat at their table, feeling small and defeated because Felix's family had actually succeeded in driving me from my own apartment. Paloma sat across from me. "Your safety matters more than pride, Wendy. Staying with us isn't weakness. It's smart planning until the restraining orders go through." I slept better that night than I had in weeks, probably because I knew nobody would be pounding on the door at random hours. My next session with Sean happened 3 days later. I sat there, staring at the carpet, trying to figure out how to say what I'd been thinking. He waited quietly, giving me space. Finally, I just said it. "I'm angry at Felix. Not just sad, not just grieving, genuinely furious with him for creating this whole situation. He'd trained his family to depend on him completely, never set a single boundary, never said no, not once. And now I was dealing with the consequences of his inability to stand up to them." The words came out fast, bitter. When I finished, I felt guilty for speaking badly about my dead husband. Sean leaned forward. "It's completely okay to be angry at Felix, Wendy, while still loving and missing him. Those feelings can exist at the same time without canceling each other out." He explained that Felix's enabling behavior had actually hurt both me and his family. By always solving their problems, paying their bills, Felix had kept them from learning to handle their own lives. Now that he was gone, they had no skills to fall back on, and blamed me instead of recognizing their own lack of preparation. Sean said Felix probably acted out of love and guilt, but the result was still harmful to everyone involved, including himself. Hearing someone validate my anger, it loosened something deep in my chest. The next morning at work, Tina called me into her office. I went in expecting problems, but she closed the door and told me she was giving me extra hours and a small raise. I started to protest. I haven't asked for anything, but she held up her hand. I can see you're going through a difficult time, Wendy, and I want to help however I can. Your work quality has always been excellent, despite your personal struggles. The company values employees who show that kind of dedication. The raise wasn't huge, but it would make a real difference. I thanked her. I went back to my desk feeling like maybe things could actually get better. That evening, I sat down with my budget spreadsheet for the first time in months and really looked at the numbers. Without supporting Felix's family, I could actually afford my rent and expenses, with some leftover for savings. The realization hit me hard. All those years of struggling had been completely unnecessary. If Felix had just set boundaries, we could have been building an emergency fund, saving for our future. Instead of watching money disappear into his father's golf trips and his mother's shopping habits, I opened a new savings account that night, transferred $50 into it. It felt pathetic compared to what I should have saved, but it also felt like progress. 2 weeks later, I was processing invoices at my desk when the receptionist called back. "Someone here to see you." I walked to the front, and there in the lobby was Damon. My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and walked straight to Tina's office, Damon following, asking why I was ignoring him. I went into Tina's office, locked the door. Damon stood outside, demanding I come out and talk to him like an adult. Tina picked up her phone and called the police. I stood against the wall, trying to keep my breathing steady. Damon kept talking through the door, saying he just needed 5 minutes to explain why cutting off the family was wrong. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Through Tina's window, I watched 2 officers talk to Damon in the lobby. Then they walked him toward the front doors. One officer told him clearly he was trespassing. If he returned, he would be arrested. Damon's voice got loud as they escorted him outside. "You're destroying my family, ruining my future. Everyone will know what kind of person you really are." The officers put him in his car, watched him drive away, then came back inside to take my statement. They gave me an incident report number. "Share this with your lawyer for the restraining order case," they suggested. I called Darren from Tina's office. He sounded pleased in a grim sort of way. "The workplace incident will strengthen our restraining order petition significantly," he said. "The pattern of escalating harassment despite legal warnings shows they're unlikely to stop without court intervention." He asked me to email him the police report. He'd incorporate it into our filing immediately. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Darren felt confident we had more than enough evidence to get the orders granted. The hearing happened on a Tuesday morning. I sat in the courtroom with Darren. The judge reviewed our petition and all the documented evidence. I'd brought printed copies of every text, every voicemail transcript, screenshots of social media posts, written accounts of every in-person confrontation. The stack of papers was thick enough to make the point. Felix's family didn't show up to contest anything, which Darren had predicted. The judge read through the materials, asked me a few questions, then granted temporary restraining orders against Miranda, Nathaniel, Damon, and Zoe. The relief I felt was physical, like someone had lifted a crushing weight off my shoulders. The orders were specific. They prohibited any of them from contacting me directly or indirectly. No calls, no texts, no emails, no messages through other people, no social media posts about me. They couldn't come within 500 feet of my home or workplace. Violations could result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. The judge made it clear these were serious legal protections. Anyone who ignored them would face consequences. Darren got copies of all the paperwork. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I could finally breathe properly for the first time since Felix died. I moved back into my apartment 3 days after the restraining orders were granted. Paloma helped me carry my things up. Mr. Novak was waiting in the lobby when we arrived with the second load. He showed me the new security camera he'd installed in the hallway outside my door. It fed directly to his office and to an app on my phone, so I could check the footage anytime. He said he wanted all his tenants to feel safe, but I knew he'd done it specifically because of Felix's family. I thanked him. He waved it off, saying good tenants were hard to find, and he wasn't about to lose one because some people didn't understand boundaries. That first night back in my own space felt strange. I'd gotten used to Paloma's guest room, the background noise of her and Miguel. My apartment was quiet in a way that made me aware of every small sound. I kept checking the camera feed on my phone, even though I knew Felix's family couldn't come near me without getting arrested. Around midnight, I finally relaxed enough to sleep. The next month passed without a single call, text, or visit from any of them. I paid my rent on time, without the panic I'd felt for months. I went grocery shopping and bought things I actually wanted instead of calculating every single item to stay under budget. Fresh vegetables, good coffee, a decent cut of meat for dinner. At the checkout, I realized I had money left over. It didn't feel like a miracle or a mistake. It just felt normal. When I got home, I transferred $200 into my savings account. It was the first time I'd added money instead of draining it since Felix died. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the balance on my phone. $200 wasn't much, but it represented something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Stability. The possibility of building something instead of constantly losing ground. My next therapy session with Sean focused on the complicated mess of emotions I carried about Felix. I told him I missed Felix desperately. Some days, the grief still knocked me flat, but I was also angry at him for creating this situation. I felt guilty for being angry at someone who was dead. Sean listened. Then, he asked me why I thought those feelings had to cancel each other out. He explained that I could love Felix and miss him, while also being legitimately angry about the financial burden he'd left me with. Both feelings were real. Both were valid. One didn't make the other wrong or inappropriate. I sat with that idea for a while. It felt like permission. Permission to stop trying to force myself into one emotional box. I could grieve the man I loved and still be frustrated that he never learned to say no to his family. I could wish he was still here and also acknowledge that his choices had hurt me. Sean said that was growth, learning to hold multiple truths at once. I enrolled in 2 additional classes toward my accounting degree. My advisor helped me map out the remaining requirements. I could finish by next spring if I took a full course load. The tuition came out of my account without, leaving me short for other bills. I registered for advanced financial accounting and business tax preparation. Both classes I'd been putting off because they were expensive and demanding. Finishing my degree felt like honoring the future Felix and I had planned. We talked about me getting my CPA license, opening my own practice, but it also felt like building something he never managed to build for himself: independence. The ability to stand on my own without being crushed by other people's expectations and demands. Paloma took me out to dinner to celebrate my first full month of no contact from Felix's family. We went to a nice Italian place downtown, the kind of restaurant where they bring bread in a basket and the pasta is made fresh. She ordered wine and made a toast. "To freedom from toxic people," she said, raising her glass. I laughed, clinked mine against hers. We talked about normal things. Work, her husband's new job, a vacation they were planning. Halfway through the meal, I realized I was genuinely enjoying myself. I wasn't thinking about Felix's family. I wasn't checking my phone nervously. I wasn't feeling guilty for spending money on something nice. It was the first time since Felix died that I'd felt present in a good moment, instead of just surviving through another day. A message came through LinkedIn the next morning. Rebecca Castellano. The last name caught my attention immediately. I opened it carefully, half expecting another attack. Instead, Rebecca explained she was Felix's cousin on his mother's side. She'd heard through family gossip about what happened between me and Felix's parents. She wanted me to know that not everyone in the family thought I was wrong. She understood why I'd cut them off, and she respected my decision. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I thanked her for reaching out, asked if we could talk more. She sent her phone number. "Call whenever you're ready." I called her that evening. Rebecca's voice was warm and friendly. She said she'd always liked Felix, thought he was one of the good ones, but she'd watched his parents take advantage of him for years. She told me Felix's parents had a long history of financial manipulation with various relatives. Borrowed money, never repaid. Convinced an uncle to co-sign a car loan, then stopped making payments. Guilted an aunt into paying for home repairs. The pattern went back decades. Different relatives, same story. They found someone with money and a sense of family obligation. And they bled that person dry until the relationship broke or the money ran out. Rebecca explained that Felix's parents had gone through bankruptcy about 10 years ago. They'd run up massive credit card debt, buying things they couldn't afford, then declared bankruptcy. But they never changed their spending habits, never took responsibility. They just found new ways to fund their lifestyle, and Felix had been their primary source for the past 14 years. She said multiple family members had tried to talk to Felix about it over the years, but he always defended his parents. He believed they needed help, and he was the only one successful enough to provide it. Rebecca thought Felix felt guilty for being the one who made out, while his family struggled. The guilt made him easy to manipulate. This information settled something in my mind that had been bothering me for months. I'd wondered if I was the problem, if I was being selfish or cruel by cutting off Felix's family when they genuinely needed help. But Rebecca's story made it clear that Felix's enabling wasn't unique. His parents had always found someone to fund their lifestyle. Felix just happened to be the most successful and the most susceptible to guilt. They would have taken everything he had, and then moved on to the next target. They probably already were now that I'd cut them off. My breakthrough came during therapy the following week. Sean and I were talking about Felix's memory and how I wanted to honor it. I'd been feeling conflicted, wondering if stopping the payments was somehow disrespecting what Felix would have wanted. Sean asked me, "What do you think Felix would have truly wanted for you if he'd known he was going to die young? Not what his family wanted or what guilt told him to do, but what he would have genuinely wanted for his wife's future." I thought about it for a long time. Felix loved me. He wanted me to be happy and secure. He wanted us to have kids someday, own a home, build a real life together. Those things had been delayed because of his family's constant demands, but they were still what he hoped for. Sean nodded. Continuing to pay Felix's family wouldn't have honored his memory, Wendy. It would have perpetuated the unhealthy dynamic that prevented Felix from building your future together. It would have trapped you in the same cycle of guilt and obligation that trapped him. Honoring Felix means building the stable, independent life he never managed to create for you. It means breaking the pattern instead of continuing it. Tina called me into her office at work on a Friday afternoon. I walked in, nervous, wondering if something was wrong with my projects. Instead, she told me she was promoting me to senior bookkeeper with a significant raise. She said my attention to detail and reliability made me invaluable. She was impressed with how I'd handled personal adversity while maintaining professional excellence, and she wanted to reward that dedication. The raise was substantial, almost 15% more than I'd been making. I thanked her, trying not to cry in her office. She smiled. "You deserve it, Wendy. Good employees are worth investing in." I walked back to my desk, feeling like something fundamental had shifted. I was moving forward, not just surviving. I was building something real. I went to the bank the next morning, opened a separate savings account, transferred $500 from my checking account as a starting point. It wasn't much, but seeing that balance sit there in an account I couldn't touch except for real emergencies made me feel safer than I had in months. I set up automatic transfers of $200 every payday. The money Felix's family had drained from me for years was finally staying where it belonged. 3 days later, I got a notification on my phone. Jessica Delgado had sent me a message request on Facebook. I didn't recognize the name. The message said she was Miranda's friend, and she wanted to talk to me about reconsidering my decision to cut off the family. She wrote that Miranda was too upset to reach out herself, but wanted me to know how much the family was struggling without Felix's support. She hoped we could work something out because families should stick together during hard times. I took screenshots immediately. My hands shook a little. This was exactly what Darren had warned me about. Miranda couldn't contact me directly because of the restraining order, so she was using a friend to get around it. I forwarded the screenshots to Darren with a brief explanation. He called me back within an hour. He sounded pleased in that grim, lawyerly way. "What Miranda did is called indirect contact, Wendy. It violates the restraining order just as much as if she'd called you herself." He said judges took these violations seriously. He was going to file a motion for contempt of court. Miranda would have to appear before the judge and explain why she thought the rules didn't apply to her. The court date was set for 2 weeks later. Darren sent me copies of all the paperwork, including the screenshots and his legal argument. He told me I didn't have to attend the hearing, but he thought it might be good for the judge to see me there and understand how the harassment affected me. I decided to go. I wanted Miranda to see that I wasn't going to back down. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Miranda sat at a table with a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She wore a black dress and had clearly been crying, her makeup smudged. When I walked in with Darren, she looked at me with such hatred that I felt it like a physical blow. The judge, a woman in her 50s, reviewed the paperwork. She asked Miranda's attorney to explain why his client had violated a restraining order. The attorney stumbled through an explanation about Miranda, just trying to reach out as family, how she didn't understand that a friend messaging me counted as contact, how she was sorry. The judge cut him off. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, she stated. The restraining order was very clear about no direct or indirect contact. Using friends or family members to send messages is one of the oldest tricks in the book, and this court will not tolerate it. She looked at Miranda. Do you understand that violating a court order is a serious matter that can result in jail time? Miranda nodded, wiping at her eyes. She said she understood, that she was just desperate to talk about her son's memory and the family's needs. The judge's expression didn't soften. Whatever family issues exist, they do not give you the right to ignore court orders. She held Miranda in contempt of court, gave her a stern warning that any further violations would result in immediate arrest and jail time. Then she extended the restraining order for another full year. Miranda started crying harder as the judge dismissed the case. Her attorney tried to guide her out, but she pulled away, looked at me one more time. Her face was red and angry despite the tears. She didn't say anything, but I could read the message clearly enough. She blamed me for everything, and she always would. I left the courthouse with Darren, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. He said the contempt finding and extended restraining order sent a clear message to Felix's entire family. They couldn't get around the rules. If they tried anything else, they'd face serious consequences. He advised me to keep documenting everything, just in case, but he thought this might finally be the end of the harassment. He was right. The calls stopped completely. The text stopped. No one showed up at my apartment or my workplace. I checked my social media every day for the first week, nervous. Nothing came through. The silence felt strange at first, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as days turned into weeks, I started to believe it was really over. I could walk to my car without looking over my shoulder. I could check my phone without my stomach clenching. I could sleep through the night without waking up to pounding on my door. My fall semester classes wrapped up in early December. I'd been worried about my grades because of everything. But when my final scores came back, I'd earned an A in financial accounting and AB+ in business statistics. My professors left comments praising my attention to detail, my clear understanding. I sat at my desk, staring at those grades, and realized something important. Without the constant stress of Felix's family demanding money and showing up to harass me, I was actually doing well. Better than well. I was succeeding at things that mattered to me. I had my regular session with Sean a few days before Thanksgiving. We'd been meeting weekly since the restraining orders, working through my complicated feelings. That day, Sean asked how I was planning to handle the holidays. It was my first Thanksgiving without Felix, and his family was completely cut off. He wanted to know if I had support, or if I was planning to spend the day alone. I admitted I hadn't really thought about it. Part of me wanted to just treat it like any other day, order takeout, watch movies, pretend the holiday wasn't happening. But Sean pointed out that avoiding it might make me feel worse. He suggested I reach out to friends. I promised I'd think about it. Paloma called me that night before I could call her. My family's having Thanksgiving at my parents' house, she said. I want you there. My mom's already set an extra place. My dad's making his famous sweet potato casserole, and he only makes that for people he likes. She wouldn't take no for an answer. Thanksgiving Day was cold and clear. I drove to Paloma's parents' house, my car packed with 2 pies I'd bought from the grocery store. Paloma's mom opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and perfume. Her dad shook my hand, took my coat. Paloma's 2 brothers were already in the living room watching football, waving at me like I'd been coming to family dinners my whole life. The day was warm, loud, full of people who didn't expect anything from me except showing up. Paloma's mom asked how I was doing, really doing, and listened when I told her about finishing my semester with good grades. Her dad told embarrassing stories about Paloma as a kid. Her brothers argued about football, passed dishes around the table. No one mentioned Felix unless I brought him up first. No one asked about his family. No one suggested I should be doing more for them. They just made space for me at their table and treated me like I belonged there. I drove home that night feeling full in a way that had nothing to do with turkey and pie. I had spent the day with people who cared about me without wanting anything in return. It was such a simple thing. But after months of Felix's family treating me like an ATM, it felt revolutionary. The following week, Sean mentioned a grief support group he facilitated on Tuesday evenings for people who'd lost spouses. He thought I might benefit from hearing other people's experiences. I told him I'd think about it, but I showed up the next Tuesday. The group met in a community center basement, folding chairs arranged in a circle. 7 other people, ages ranging from late 20s to early 70s. Sean introduced me, explained I didn't have to share anything. I could just listen. But halfway through the meeting, I found myself talking about Felix, about his family, about how complicated grief became when you were angry at the person you lost. A woman named Carol nodded. I understand completely, she said. Her husband had left her with massive gambling debts. She'd spent 2 years feeling guilty for being angry at a dead man. I kept going back every Tuesday. Hearing other people's stories gave me perspective. Some had lost spouses to long illnesses, felt guilty for being relieved it was over. Others had sudden losses, struggled with the shock. One man's wife had died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver, and he was eaten up with rage. We were all carrying complicated grief, and somehow that made it easier to carry. By mid-January, I realized something strange. I'd gone 3 full days without thinking about Miranda, or Nathaniel, or Damon, or Zoe. 3 entire days where Felix's family didn't cross my mind even once. The mental space they'd occupied for months was slowly filling with other things. My spring semester classes, my work projects, plans to visit Paloma's family again for her brother's birthday, the grief support group, and the people I was getting to know there. My own life was expanding to fill the space that Felix's family had taken up, and I was letting it happen. I made an appointment with a financial planner in late January, Susan Brennan. I explained my situation, how I'd been supporting my late husband's family for years and had only recently stopped. My part-time job, my raise, my degree program. I said I wanted to figure out realistic goals now that my money was actually mine to keep. Susan listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions about my expenses, income, timeline for finishing school. Then she pulled out a calculator and a legal pad, started running numbers. She showed me how much I could save each month if I stuck to a budget. She mapped out a plan for building an emergency fund of 6 months' expenses, which would take about 2 years. After that, I could start saving for a down payment on a small house or condo, maybe in another 3 or 4 years. She explained retirement accounts, compound interest, how even small contributions now would grow over time. By the time I left her office, I had a folder full of printouts and a plan that felt real and possible. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something that belonged to me. Something no one could take away. For the first time since Felix died, I could see a future that didn't revolve around other people's demands. It was just mine, and that felt like enough. February marked what would have been Felix's 37th birthday. I drove to the cemetery alone on a cold Tuesday morning, carrying a small bouquet of the blue irises he'd always liked. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates. Nothing fancy, because the funeral costs had eaten through most of the insurance money. I sat on the frozen ground next to his grave. I talked to him the way I used to talk to him in our kitchen while he made coffee. I told him I was sorry his family turned out the way they did, that their love had always come with price tags he couldn't see. I told him about the restraining orders, the court appearances, how his mother had tried to paint me as a thief on social media. I explained that I was building the stable future we'd always talked about, the one where we didn't live paycheck to paycheck, the one where money stayed in our accounts long enough to grow. I was doing it without him, which felt wrong and right at the same time. The wind picked up. I stood, brushing dead grass off my jeans, and promised him I'd be okay, even though he never figured out how to be okay himself. Spring semester finals came in May. I took them while working full-time hours at the office. Tina had quietly increased my schedule without making a big deal about it, giving me more responsibility and better projects. The accounting courses were harder than anything I'd done before, but I studied every night, making flashcards, practice problems until the numbers made sense. When grades posted in early June, I'd earned straight A's across all 4 classes. The registrar's office sent an email confirming I'd completed all degree requirements and would graduate with honors at the summer ceremony. I called Paloma immediately. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She insisted on taking me shopping for something nice to wear under the graduation gown. We spent an entire Saturday trying on dresses until we found a simple blue one that didn't cost a fortune. The graduation ceremony was on a Saturday morning in late June. I sat in the third row of folding chairs with 200 other graduates, sweating in my black gown under the outdoor tent. Paloma and Tina were somewhere in the audience. I kept scanning the crowd, trying to spot them. When they called my name, I walked across the stage, shook hands with the dean. Someone took my photo. The diploma cover was empty, but it didn't matter. I knew what it meant. I'd finished what Felix and I started together, the degree that was supposed to lead to better jobs. Financial security. Paloma and Tina found me afterward in the crowd. They were both crying, hugging me, telling me how proud they were. Tina handed me a card with a gift certificate to a nice restaurant. Paloma gave me a framed photo of Felix and me from our wedding, and I had to work hard not to break down completely. Monday morning, Tina called me into her office before I'd even logged into my computer. "Close the door, Wendy. Sit down." My stomach dropped. That's never good. But then she smiled and slid a folder across her desk. Inside was an offer letter for a full-time position as the company's accounting manager, health insurance, retirement benefits, and a salary that was more than Felix and I had ever made combined. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood the numbers correctly. Tina explained that they'd been planning to post the position externally, but she'd convinced the partners that I was already doing the work and doing it better than anyone they'd hire. "Your attention to detail and reliability make you valuable, Wendy. And I watched you handle impossible personal circumstances while maintaining excellent work quality." I accepted before she finished talking, shaking her hand, thanking her so many times she laughed and told me to stop. I called Paloma from my car during lunch and cried for 20 minutes while she celebrated on the other end of the line. A full year had passed since I'd sent the cease and desist letters and cut off Felix's family completely. I was sitting at my desk in my new office, with my name on the door, reviewing financial statements, approving invoices. My savings account had grown to include 6 months of emergency expenses, plus additional funds I was setting aside for future down payment. I'd paid off the last of my credit card debt, started contributing to the company retirement plan. The restraining orders were still in effect, and I hadn't heard from Miranda, Nathaniel, Damon, or Zoe in months. My apartment felt like mine, instead of a place I was hiding. I saw Sean twice a month now instead of weekly, and we talked more about future goals and past trauma. And I'd learned that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for their family's dysfunction. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, but survival. I was financially stable, emotionally healthier, building a life that belonged entirely to me. Some days, I still missed Felix, so much it hurt to breathe. But I was okay, truly okay, and I knew he would have wanted that for me, even if he never figured out how to want it for himself. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with family, even when it was incredibly painful? Or perhaps you're navigating grief that's more complicated than people realize. I'd love to hear your experiences, your advice, or just your thoughts on this whole messy situation in the comments below.